My name is Mark. I finished my degree at Western State University in 2016. My college years were about as good as I could have hoped for. I joined a fraternity, kept my grades in check, and had plenty of fun chasing girls when I had the time. I'm still close with a number of my old fraternity brothers. And not too long ago, I got engaged to my fiancée Claire, who I also met back in college. If you had asked me during my first year what I thought of Western, though I would have given you a very different answer. What happened to me that year is one of the biggest reasons why I wasn't the most ambitious student in high school. So stepping into the competitive atmosphere at Western felt overwhelming. Suddenly, I was surrounded by students who all called themselves overachievers, each one seemingly planning their entire careers before even turning 19. It was strange, but it was the culture as a freshman. I quickly got pulled into that same mindset, career prep, resume building, and trying to map out the next 30 years of life before I'd even finished my first semester. Looking back, it seems silly, but at Western, that was the standard. If you wanted to get anywhere in the business world, you needed to look professional online. Having a polished LinkedIn was treated like a requirement. I still remember the stress I felt trying to make myself seem professional with the right connections, the right skills, and the right wording, as if everything hinged on it. Still, I did what everyone else did, checked all the boxes, and started searching for a summer internship. Not too long into that process, my inbox pinged with something unexpected. A message from a well-regarded business firm showed up, expressing direct interest in ME. To my surprise, it wasn't one of those automated spam messages either. The content felt specific, almost like it had been written just for me. I must have reread it 6 or 7 times before working up the courage to respond. After a day of back and forth, I was invited to a first-round interview. I spent the next several days preparing. I researched the company thoroughly, tried to anticipate the questions, and practiced answers until I felt ready. Eventually, I received a message from someone named Adrian Stoltz, who introduced himself as my interviewer. That name has never left my memory. Naturally, the first thing I did was try to look him up. I scrolled through LinkedIn, searching for Adrian's profile. For someone supposedly working at a major firm, I expected to find plenty of information, but to my confusion, nothing came up. No LinkedIn, no professional presence, not even a trace on social media. At first it struck me as strange, but I brushed it aside. Maybe he just valued his privacy. Adrian and I agreed on a day and time for the interview. He gave me an address, which I looked up immediately. To my confusion, the location was a coffee shop, not in my college town, but in a neighborhood across the bay. The choice puzzled me. Western had plenty of good coffee shops, perfect for interviews, so why there? Still, the address online looked fine, so I didn't overthink it. The day before the interview, I mentioned the situation to my friend Daniel. His reaction was even stronger than mine. He thought the whole setup seemed questionable. I admitted he had a point, but I convinced myself it was worth the risk. The opportunity sounded too good. He asked how I was getting there, and I told him I'd planned to take a rideshare. Daniel offered to drive me instead. Since he had no plans, I accepted, and to this day I'm grateful I did. If not for him, I might not be telling this story at all. The next day, at 4 p.m., Daniel pulled up outside my dorm. It was one of my first interviews, and I was nervous. I got in and we headed out. About 20 minutes later, as we neared the spot, I told him to let me out a block early. I didn't want to look like I'd been dropped off by a friend. I thanked him, and he asked if I wanted him to wait. When I hesitated, he smirked, pulled out a bag of weed from his dashboard, and said he had nothing better to do. I laughed, got out, and closed the door. I walked for a couple of minutes, but when I reached the location, I froze. In front of me was a construction site. No coffee shop, no open businesses, just closed-off buildings and half-demolished structures. The whole block seemed deserted, as if it had been cleared. Recently, so recently that Google Maps hadn't updated yet. Confused, I pulled out my phone to call Daniel, but before I could dial, a loud voice called out my name. Mark 1 spun around. A tall man in an expensive black suit stood there, his presence dominating the empty street. He looked completely out of place. Standing next to him was a matte black luxury car, a Bentley. Relief washed over me. This had to be the interviewer. We shook hands. I asked about the construction site, and he looked just as surprised as me. He furrowed his brows, put a hand to his chin, and after a pause said, "Why don't we head somewhere else? Get in." He motioned to the car before walking back toward it. Over his shoulder, he called out, "Front seat's yours." Then he got in and closed the door. I followed, glancing around the sleek car as I walked. Out of curiosity, I peeked into the back seat, expecting to see polished leather interiors. Instead, what I saw made my blood run cold lying on the floor. In the shadows was a man holding a long metallic object. It hit me instantly. This was a setup. Without a second thought, I turned and sprinted away. Behind me, I heard the man call my name, but I didn't look back. Then came the sound I had dreaded, the screech of tires. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The Bentley had swung around, headlights aimed directly at me. My heart pounded. I knew I couldn't outrun a car. I just had to find some kind of escape. The streets twisted in every direction, and panic filled my chest. I reached an intersection and faced a choice, left or right. Logic told me left. It was closer, but my body acted first, pushing me right. I sprinted down the street, counting the seconds in my head, 10, maybe 20, before they caught up. And then by some stroke of luck, I spotted a fire escape hanging just low enough to grab. Summoning everything I had, I leaped, caught the ladder, and hauled myself up. For someone who had never done a pull-up in his life, the adrenaline made it possible. The Bentley rounded the corner and skidded to a stop below me. Though I couldn't see the driver clearly, I knew he was watching. I kept climbing, heart hammering, until I reached the landing. Seconds dragged into what felt like minutes. The car idled, then slowly pulled away, accelerating down the street. It turned the corner and disappeared. I stayed frozen, unable to breathe. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called Daniel, practically screaming into the receiver. As I explained, I stayed on that fire escape until he found me. When I got in his car, neither of us spoke. We just drove away in silence. Afterward, I did everything I could to push it out of my memory. I never spoke about it, not even with Daniel. As far as I was concerned, it didn't happen. But sometimes, like now, the memory resurfaces, and when it does, I remember every unsettling detail from what could have easily been the last day of my life. This is something that happened not too long ago. My family drove with me to campus to help me settle in since I had just started my first year. When we arrived, I found out that my housing assignment was a Jack and Jill setup, meaning our room shared a bathroom with another room. In total, I'd be living alongside 3 other students. I already knew one of the guys in the connecting room since we'd met during orientation and talked a bit, but his roommate isn't relevant here. The one I want to talk about is the person I shared my room with, whose name was Dorian. Before move-in day, I had already gotten his social media, and we exchanged some details online. I tried messaging him on Instagram to break the ice, but his responses were really short and uninterested. His profile also gave off the kind of vibe you'd expect from someone who moderates random online servers. When we finally moved in and met in person, he ironically fit that description, except he was slim and about my height. His skin was pale, and he had a faint mustache just beginning to grow. I tried chatting with him face to face, but he spoke the same way. He texted hesitant, reserved, and often cutting conversation short. He stammered often and avoided EYE contact. At one point I asked him what music he liked, hoping that would spark something, but he replied that he didn't listen to any because music didn't fill his emptiness. That response caught me off guard. Not long after, he set up his PlayStation in the room. Gaming itself wasn't unusual, but the way he played was unsettling. He would grunt, loudly shake his body aggressively while holding the controller, and laugh in bursts as he button mashed. Sometimes he stuck his feet into the desk cabinet, tugging them toward his chest while jerking around. On top of that, he whispered under his breath when gaming alone or with friends online, then repeated what he said twice, followed by little jiggle-s. He never seemed to leave the room, and rarely did any schoolwork. At night when I tried to sleep, his erratic movements and noise made it hard to relax. But that wasn't the worst part. During the first week, I went out late with a few new friends from the dorm building. I came back close to 0 inches the morning. When I got in, Dorian looked like he was asleep, so I didn't think much of it, and went over to my cabinet beside the bed. Out of nowhere, I felt my hair stand on end, and I turned around instinctively. Dorian was wide awake, staring at me with a faint grin, startled. I blurted, "What the hell, Dorian? Why are you looking at me like that?" He chuckled and muttered, "Nighttime," before rolling over to face the wall. that moment unsettled me deeply. It didn't just happen once. He did it 3 more times in the following weeks. I tried getting reassigned to another dorm, but the housing office told me there were no openings. I even asked about moving into the room next to ours, but one of the guys there refused to switch. That meant I was stuck sharing with Dorian for the semester. About 3 months later, after my English class, I came back to the room. When I opened the door, Dorian jumped up suddenly and asked why I was back so soon. That was strange since my class had actually ended late, so it was later than usual. I asked if he needed privacy, but he waved it off while striking a bizarre pose. That looked like something out of a cartoon telling me not to worry about it. His attempt at reassurance only made me more uneasy. I noticed a small box on his desk and casually asked about it. He brushed it off, saying it wasn't important. Around the same time, I realized my phone charger and a pair of scissors were missing. When I asked him, he admitted he had them. He handed back the scissors, and as he was passing me the charger, the cord accidentally knocked the box off his desk. The lid flipped open, and what spilled out froze me in shock. A sticky note with my name written on it slid to the floor. Next to it was a clear case containing things that should have never been there. Some false eyelashes, a pair of glasses, one of my socks, and a disposable photo I had taken as a joke. Dorian scrambled to gather everything up, stammering about it not being what it looked like. I yelled at him to get out of the room, and he quickly left. Shaken, I immediately texted my resident advisor about what happened. He said he was away, but told me to hold on to the box so he'd have proof when he returned the next day, which could justify removing Dorian. I took the box and hid it in my laundry bin. The thought of sharing a room with him after that disgusted me. An hour later, Dorian came back. I told him to stay on his side of the room and not speak to me. He didn't argue, and we didn't exchange any more words. I tried to stay awake, worried he might try to retrieve the box, but exhaustion eventually caught up, and I passed out around 2:00 a.m. When I woke up, he was gone, which felt like a relief. But then I remembered the box. I checked my laundry bin, and it was missing. My heart dropped shortly after the RA knocked on the door. I explained everything, but without the box, all I had was my story, and he said he couldn't take action based solely on my word. I felt completely helpless. Hours later, Dorian came back as if nothing happened. I confronted him about the box, but he acted clueless, saying, "What box? I don't know what you're talking about." I pushed him, but he stuck to denying it. I couldn't stand to even look at him anymore. Now it's the second semester, and unfortunately, I'm still stuck sharing the dorm with him. He told me he wouldn't ever repeat what he did, and that if something happened again, he'd come clean, and we'd move out immediately. I accepted it because I had no other choice. Even so, I spend as little time as possible in the room. He still unnerves me. Some nights I can't sleep, and even during the day, I find myself distracted thinking about that box. Why did he take my photo? Why my socks? What was the purpose of the glasses? And the most disturbing of all, what did those EY lashes mean? And why out of everything was my name written on the box? This took place during my first year of college back in 2019. I've graduated since then, but the memory of that night still lingers in my mind. My school went all out for Halloween week. There were parties nearly every day. I went to a Midwestern university where football was a big deal, and the fraternity scene was huge. Costume parties were everywhere, even local bars required people to dress up. The atmosphere was chaotic, lots of alcohol, plenty of arrests, and more than enough stories to last a lifetime. The night in question was that Saturday. Our football team had won a big game earlier that day, and my group of friends and I planned to head to a fraternity off campus to celebrate. We knew about the party because one of my friends, Marissa, was dating a player from the team. We arrived around 11 p.m., and the place was already wild. Drinks were flowing nonstop. People were chanting about the rival school we'd beaten, and music was blasting so loudly it was hard to think. I was taking shots and dancing with my friends, fully caught up in the fun. One detail that ended up being important, I didn't have my phone with me. The battery had died earlier, so I left it with Marissa in her bag. Sometime later, I told everyone I needed to run to the bathroom and asked them to wait for me near the DJ booth. At that point, all of us were already fairly drunk. While I was in the bathroom, I suddenly heard someone from upstairs shout, police at the top of their lungs. Immediately, the house broke into chaos. People were yelling, rushing toward the doors, trying to get away. I bolted out and was met with flashing lights and several squad cars. Students were sprinting in all directions. Some officers were speaking to fraternity members, while others chased after underage partygoers. In my drunken state, the reality hit me. I didn't have my phone. I started calling out for my friends, trying to spot them in the crowd while avoiding the police at the same time. After a few minutes, I realized finding them wasn't going to happen. With no better option, I figured I should try to make my way back to my dorm. The only problem was, I wasn't exactly sure how to get there from this part of town. The fraternity was located in a section of the city I didn't usually go to, far from the main campus. Still, I started walking. The freezing air sobered me slightly. It was late October, but that night the temperature had dropped to nearly 37 degrees. My buzz remained, but my senses were sharpening as I trudged through the cold. Eventually I decided I needed to get out of the wind and take a break. I spotted a large building nearby that looked like it could be one of the school's academic halls. Grateful for some shelter, I went up to the door, pulled it open, and stepped inside. The place was dim, only lit by glowing exit signs above the doorways. For the first few minutes, I just sat in the warmth, trying to collect myself. But as the alcohol wore off, I began to realize that the place didn't look like a classroom building. The layout was wrong, the smell was strange, and the whole place gave off an unsettling vibe. It dawned on me that I wasn't in a lecture hall at all. I was inside some sort of warehouse. Feeling uneasy, I decided to leave. I went back to the door I'd come through, only to find it locked. A wave of dread swept over me. How had I managed to open it before? If it couldn't be opened now, I forced myself to stay calm and looked for another way out. Spotting another door under one of the exit signs, I hurried toward it and pushed it open, expecting to finally get outside. Instead, I found myself stepping into another interior space. This room was smaller, bathed in a faint red glow. A low mechanical hum filled the air, and the place was hazy with steam. Heavy chains dangled from the ceiling, swaying slightly. The scene felt like something straight out of a horror set. My instincts told me to turn around, but when I tried the door behind me, it too was locked. Panic rose in my chest, and I slid down against the wall, tears stinging my eyes as I tried to keep myself quiet. That's when I heard it. The sharp echo of a door slamming somewhere in the building, followed by heavy footsteps. My body froze. Another door closed, and the steps grew louder, coming closer to the room I was in. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it could be heard. Moving as quietly as I could, I opened a door next to me and slipped into another section of the warehouse. Chains clinked softly as I pushed through them. Moving past bursts of steam, I could hear the footsteps again, this time from the room I just left. Whoever it was had entered, and they were searching. Their steps were slow, deliberate, and heavy. At that moment, my survival instincts took over. I spotted a window along one wall. Without thinking, I ran to it and began kicking it with all the force I could muster. It took 5 hard kicks before the glass shattered. At the same time the footsteps picked up speed. Racing toward me, I knew I had only seconds to act. I climbed through the broken frame, not realizing how far the drop was. The fall was at least 10 feet, and I landed roughly on top of 2 large recycling bins. The impact rattled me, but adrenaline pushed me back on my feet. Looking up, I saw the shattered window above me. At first, no one was there, but as I ducked into the shadows of a cluster of pine trees nearby, I risked a glance upward, and that's when I saw a dark figure at the window, scanning the area below. Every muscle in my body tensed with terror. Remaining as quiet as possible, I slipped across the street and then sprinted, running harder and longer than I ever had in my life. I didn't stop until I finally recognized familiar buildings on the edge of campus. When I reached my dorm, my friends were outside waiting. Their faces were pale, and they rushed me the moment they saw me. Apparently, I had been missing for almost 4 hours. The next morning, I told them everything. They sat in stunned silence as I described what had happened. Later, we learned that the building I had stumbled into had been abandoned for years. My stomach dropped at the realization. Whoever had been inside that night wasn't security, wasn't staff, and definitely wasn't a police officer. It was just someone. Someone who was there for reasons I still don't understand. I've tried since then to look into what that place was and if anyone else had experiences like mine, but nothing ever turned up. To this day, it remains the most terrifying thing I've ever gone through. If I hadn't acted quickly, if I hadn't kept quiet, I honestly don't know if I would have made it out alive.